Hello, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. My name is Chris Crawford. Today is Sunday, July 2nd. Since we won't get a chance to wish it, both me and my guest Ryan Boyer will wish you guys all a happy Independence Day. Hope you get s'mores. That's what you should do, is you should make s'mores. I mean, hot dogs are good, all that stuff, but it is definitely s'mores time, baby. We are going to talk about some headlines, some players who performed well on Saturday, some players who didn't perform so well on Saturday, and also offer some FAAB recommendations. But Ryan, we got some bummer news, and unfortunately this happened right after Drew and I did our draft, and Mr. Silva happened to select Shane McClanahan as his pitcher that he wanted for the second half of the season. Well, he's going to have to hit the waiver wire on our Figment draft because, unfortunately, Shane McClanahan is going on the injured list. And this is a big bummer, Mr. Boyer, because Mr. McClanahan, when he's healthy, has been as good as any pitcher in baseball.
Oh, I thought we were talking about the bummer news being that Twitter is broken.
Oh, no, that's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. We could have a long conversation about how the heck we do our jobs with this development, Ryan. But
yeah. When I logged on earlier today, it seemed to be back to normal.
Same.
So I don't know if that's I don't know. Okay, let's talk about Shane McClanahan. We could go down a real dangerous rabbit hole.
Very
we should probably tread lightly on.
Yes.
So yeah, Shane McClanahan, he had to come out of consecutive starts with a back issue. And this time, going to send him to the injured list. It seems more precautionary, is my initial read. I mean, they have the built-in extra rest around the All-Star break. So, I mean, the Orioles are kind of nipping at their heels, but Rays are sitting pretty well, and they do not need to be pushing their ace. That's for sure. So giving him extra rest around the All-Star break, I suspect, even if it is indeed precautionary, and he could come back in 15-ish days. They'll probably push him back to maybe their fifth start after the break, just to give him a little extra time. That would make sense. He has had a back issue in the past, but this was like 2021, I think. So I don't know if we necessarily can make a determination if that makes it a little worse or not. Never like to have a player having chronic back issues, but which this is certainly not right. Certainly not rising to the level of that at this point. But yeah, Shane McClanahan, number 3 in earned auction value per RotoWire's player rater tool. League leader in wins, I believe. I mean, he's been as awesome as his fantasy managers could have hoped for. The shoulder issues that he dealt with down the stretch last year have not cropped up at all. That would be definitely more worrisome than the back issue, but
right.
Hopefully we're just talking about a minimum-ish IL stay for the big lefty.
Yeah, here's hoping. I will say I did watch him pitch on Friday against Seattle, and he did not look good. It was not an impressive outing, and the fact he got pulled in that fourth inning was kind of an uh-oh for me. Of course, they didn't say it was injury-related at the time, but it was saying without saying that there was something that was going to be going on. But hopefully it is a short stint. You will see a few guys, I think, get placed when they can on the injured list in this type of situation, because the All-Star break is coming up and it's an extra 4 days of rest. There will be some roster manipulation, but it's still never a good sign to see the guy hit the injured list. But hopefully, Ryan, you're right that it's just a short little stay. 2 guys who are not going on the injured list but are dealing with injuries right now are Clayton Kershaw and Framber Valdez. Now, we did get some good news on Kershaw just about 10 minutes before recording. Manager Dave Roberts said that there was progress being made with Kershaw and he will not be placed on the IL at this time, that he's made improvement every day since the injection, and that the team will make a decision tomorrow whether or not he will need an injured list stunt or not. Stint. I just gave you every vowel there. while I am willing to say that I'm optimistic, and it's good news that they're not placing him on the IL now, would not shock me whatsoever if this is something that they announce tomorrow, just as a precaution. Kershaw, by the way, has been fantastic this year. A very good chance, if he is healthy or healthy enough to start, I think, the National League All-Star game this year. He's been that good. But I think that the Dodgers are going to take every precaution they can. Unfortunately, this is just a rotation that has just been killed by injuries. A rotation in a bullpen. I mean, we've talked about it, I think, the last few shows. Every time I go to edit the depth chart of the Los Angeles Dodgers, I have to move like 6 guys around on the injured list because they did get Daniel Hudson back. That's a nice little return for their pitching staff. But you take a look and there's we're at starting pitcher 13, I think, Ryan, on the depth chart. Here's hoping this is a short little stint. Now, as for Framber Valdez, the news is not as good, I think, but also we're going to have to take a little bit of a wait and see approach. He's missing his start today against the Astros with shoulder problems. I mean, how many times do we got to say banned shoulders? What has to be done for me to actually get shoulders to be banned? We can just have some sort of surgery where we can just have necks somehow become the thing that can help these guys throw the baseball, Ryan. What are we going to do?
Is it a shoulder with Framber? I thought it was an ankle. Am I misremembering?
Well, here's the thing, Ryan. This is a live television show, and I could be wrong about that.
I remember reading that he tweaked his ankle as he was walking down the dugout steps 2 starts ago, and then said it was kind of affected him in his last start. Maybe I missed something.
Let's just scratch all of that because it was a sprained ankle, and I just got my notes confused because that's what happens. He's missing his start with a sprained ankle. That is much more positive news than a shoulder injury, obviously. Now, look, sprained ankles can certainly be something that you need to push off, so it will be something to keep an eye on. But I'm very happy to say that all of my stuff about shoulder stuff was nonsense. And if we could go back and go, we would do that and just say it is an ankle issue for Framber Valdez. Long story short with Framber, though, something you got to keep an eye on. Sprained ankles often lead to injured list stints for whether you're a pitcher, whether you are a center fielder, whether you're a catcher. If you sprain your ankle, the severity of the grade, obviously, not a doctor, but I think we all know that the severity of the grade is going to be what determines whether or not he's making starts again. And a guy they need. The Astros also have dealt with a ton of injuries to their starting rotation. And their starting rotation, that when healthy, just hasn't been all that good. The Astros have been a weird team this year. They show these flashes of brilliance, but clearly missing Yordan Alvarez and clearly going to miss Framber Valdez if he does have to be placed on the injured list.
Yeah, and the ankle, even if the severity of the grade isn't super high, that's something. If it's still a little bit tender, I don't know which foot it is, if it's the push off or the landing foot, but could it potentially affect mechanics, and that could lead to other injuries like a shoulder. Maybe you just had a premonition about I hope not.
Oh, maybe I hope not. Yeah.
I mean, you're gonna get in trouble now, Chris, if he winds up hurting his shoulder for compensating for that ankle injury.
I don't.
These Astros fans are gonna come at you.
Yeah. Well, you can't find me on Twitter anymore, so it's fine.
Everyone's reached their rate limit. But yeah, Kershaw. The earned dollar value, auction value calculator I mentioned earlier with McClanahan being number 3. Kershaw is actually number 2 on that list. Just giving you an idea how awesome he has been. But yeah, it sounds, I always worry about teams not being extra. And then the Dodgers usually are very cautious. I hope the fact that they have dealt with so many rotation injuries isn't pushing them towards making a kind of a risky decision here. I can't imagine that that's the case. They're talking about a legend in Clayton Kershaw and a shoulder. They got to be pretty confident that it's a minor thing. But again, around the All-Star break would certainly serve as an opportune time to give him some extra rest. So it wouldn't be a shock to me if they go ahead and make that move. Same with Framber as well. Both of these teams, surprisingly, not in first place in their divisions, so they can't.
That's true.
They can't dilly-dally too much. But you gotta be extra cautious when it comes to protecting your aces. Another guy who got hurt and already has been placed on the injured list. Royce Lewis, back on the IL. He did not blow out his knee. That's the positive.
Yeah.
He did strain an oblique, though. That could potentially be a multi-week absence. Lewis had really started to turn around lately. Past 11 games, he had batted .400, the 10.04 OPS with 2 home runs and 1 stolen base. It kind of inched his way up in the Twins lineup a little bit. He's mostly batted 5th or 6th, but lately, since he's been heating up, he's, I think, batted 3rd once, cleaned up a couple times. So it's a bummer. The plate discipline with Lewis had not been great, but overall, I think definitely positive signs from him. So this is a bummer timing wise, and just a bummer for him because he's got to be just so sick of these injuries at this point.
Oh my goodness.
Who could blame him? But hopefully it's not too long of an IL stint for Royce Lewis. Jose Miranda's coming back. Not great at AAA. He did not earn this promotion. I believe he's got a sub 700 OPS at AAA St. Paul. So not terribly optimistic. I haven't seen what the Twins lineup is for today. I could see him certainly getting some starts at third base, but they also have Kyle Farmer as an option there. I'm not really terribly interested in Miranda in mixed formats. I don't know about you. I'm fine with giving him a shot in AL only, but mixed leagues, he's not back on my radar.
No, and honestly, one of the issues that Miranda's had is, especially at the highest level, is that his patience at the plate is terrible. He's really struggled to pick pitches to swing at, and whether or not to, well, it's not good. Royce Lewis just bums the heck out of me, man, because he's one of my favorite prospects. He looked so good last year before the injury. He looked pretty darn good. I mean, the hard hit percentage was fairly low, 37%, so there was a little bit of good luck coming there. But you see the potential there. You see the potential for power. You see the potential for stolen bases. Here's hoping this is a short one on the injured list, because his potential is, I think he competes with a lot of infielders in baseball. There are very few guys that I would say this guy is clearly better than Royce Lewis right now. Unfortunately, though, this is now a habit. This is something that I don't want to call him the Byron Buxton of the infield for the Twins just yet, but there were 2 significant injuries, and now this oblique injury. I'm really hoping this is all precautionary and he's back sometime shortly after the All-Star break, because I really like this guy. But I would not be adding Miranda as the guy to go replace him. I would be looking elsewhere on the waiver wire. There's some good guys. In fact, we'll give you a guy when we talk about FAAB, a guy who might still be available in leagues who I think could make sense there. Let's end on some positive news. Andrew Painter. So Andrew Painter has thrown a bullpen. For those of you who forgot, Andrew Painter looked like he was on his way to maybe even joining the Phillies out of spring training to be one of their 5 starters, widely considered by many, not necessarily me, but many, to be the best pitching prospect in baseball. A 6'7" right-hander who can throw strikes with 4 well above average pitches, or plus if you want to go that route. I'll be really curious, Ryan, to see how they treat this, because if the Phillies are still in this thing, which they are, and still not getting a whole heck of a lot of help from their rotation, which they are not, I'll be really curious to see how they use him and whether or not they're willing to give him that chance, because he is a massive part of their long-term plan. He might be a reason why Aaron Nola is not a Philadelphia Philly in 2024, to be completely honest with you, using some of their resources, although nobody's going bankrupt over signing Aaron Nola, so let's just calm down with that as well. But if they do believe that he is ready to be a a starting option for that team next year, or even at some point this year. It's going to be really interesting to see. I'm probably going to add Painter to my imminent arrivals list this week, just because I do think that we will see him pitching for Philadelphia at some point. But I also could see Painter being a multi-inning relief guy that you manage the innings for, because he's never had a big workload. We're going to talk about another guy who's hasn't had a big workload and did not have a whole heck of a lot of fun on Saturday, just as a little spoiler alert. But I do think Painter has a chance for success. I'd be curious to see, Ryan, what you're doing with Painter. Is he somebody, if he's still available in redraft leagues, that you're adding now?
Redraft, deeper, sure. Shallower leagues, I think it's probably a little soon. I did see he is going to face hitters Tuesday, I believe.
Yes, correct.
So, I mean, that's pretty close to the precipice of a rehab assignment. I don't know how many live BP sessions or simulated games or whatever you want to call them.
Right.
Still not really sure what the difference is between those. I'll be honest. But yeah, usually when you're talking about a lengthy absence, they usually give you multiple of those. And I assume he's going to need probably all 30 allotted days on that rehab assignment. So we're talking about maybe August 1, a rough estimate. So I think probably shallower mixed leagues, redraft leagues, probably not a necessity to stash him. But yeah, I mean, the Phillies, they've gotten some good work out of Chris Sanchez lately. But yeah, you could always use an arm like Andrew Painter. By the way, you mentioned the Phillies are still in it. One of the 600 tweets I was allowed to see yesterday, I noticed Shaq, who I guess he was DJing maybe in Philadelphia or something.
Good for him.
Predicted the Phillies to win the World Series. So, I mean, just write it down in stone at this point, right?
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know Shaq DJ'd. To steal a very popular meme, I wasn't familiar with your game, Shaq. I didn't know that you were. I do know that you used to rhyme quite a bit and had the "Do you want me to shoot it? Do you want me to pass it? Do you want me to slam it?" Song that somehow didn't win every single Grammy ever, but good for Shaq out there DJing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's just as viable as a lot of the predictions we see, if we're being honest, especially on the Twitter tweets.
Well, and on this weekend show, to be honest with you too.
Exactly. But yeah, Painter, upside is obviously sky high. I agree that it could be even if he does into the rotation, we'll say super optimistically on August 1st, how deep is he going to be able to go into games? I mean, if I'm setting the over-under on 6+ inning starts for him, I'm probably putting it at like 2 in 2023. So, I'm not expecting a redraft value. He's still more of a dynasty league guy. And, keep in mind, he's coming back from a partially torn UCL. So he's definitely not out of the woods there injury-wise, even if his throwing sessions go well. But all in all, still positive news, and I hope we get to see Andrew Painter at some point in the near future.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about prospects, I thought this question was interesting. Pick one to stash: Ronnie Mauricio, Oscar Colas, or Oscar Gonzalez, all ranking like a mofo. I think we can say that on the podcast in the minors right now. I personally would go with Mauricio. I just think there's a really strong path to him getting everyday playing time with those guys. And Colas, I like that he's driving the baseball again. That's nice to see. And by again, I mean he's driving the baseball. He just was not driving the baseball whatsoever with the White Sox, and not in AAA either. Even though the average was solid, like you just were like, dude, when are you going to start showing that plus power that you were promising us not that long ago? Oscar Gonzalez, to me, is still more of a platoon bat type of thing. So even when he gets the call up, I don't think you're going to see him play against right-handers enough. I think long-term he's interesting, but he might have to change organizations in order to be able to tap into his power. I think that the Guardians might be a little too infatuated with Brennan at this point, if I'm being completely honest with you. It must be the way that Jerry DiPoto feels about Abraham Toro, that's how they feel about, not quite saying Brennan has been as bad as Abraham Toro, but I think everybody knows what I'm saying. People get these infatuations with players, whether it's deserved or not. But I would probably be stashing Mauricio. Real quick, Ryan, which one of those three would you be stashing?
Yeah, the Guardians are not exactly known for their ability to churn out and identify outfield players. So, yeah. But yeah, in a redraft, I would think I would lean Colas. I still think he probably has a clearer path to regular playing time. Although, I mean, it depends on what are the Mets going to do at the trade deadline. Certainly going to be interesting to watch. Mauricio, I think, definitely has the higher long-term upside, though.
Yeah, for sure. Mauricio is a guy that, unfortunately, the June hasn't been very good. I think if the June had been a little better, we probably are not even talking about him as a minor league player to stash. He's probably already up. But it's very encouraging to see Colas playing. And also, here's something that really helps. The White Sox stink. So there is absolutely a reason to find out exactly what you have in Oscar Colas, because it's not like they're playing for a playoff spot anytime. Even in the goodness gracious awful Central, did you see how they lost their game yesterday?
No, I did not actually.
We'll talk about it off air. It's one of the worst losses I've seen in a while. We've got a Bach and Air, and they did it to Double-A Midland. Double-A Midland in extra innings. They've now lost 2 in a row to that wonderful, wonderful baseball team that we continue to scream high praises for the wonderful efforts being made by the 2023 Athletics. That covers most of the big weekend stories. We'll do our 3 up and 3 down for Saturday and talk waiver targets. But first, a quick commercial break. All right, so let's go with the 3 up. And we talked a bunch about the Phillies, Ryan. Why don't you talk about another member of the Phillies who had a pretty darn good little Saturday?
Yeah, Alec Boehm. The Phillies had a little bit of fun yesterday at the expense of the Washington Nationals. 19 runs, 18 hits, 4 home runs for the Phils yesterday. Alec Boehm had 2 of those home runs as part of a 4-hit day, 6 RBIs, 3 runs scored. Still waiting on that breakout from Alec Boehm, and I'm just not terribly optimistic we're going to get it at this point. I think maybe he just is what he is. He's still crushing lefties, which has been a career-long thing for him.
Sure.
Going into today, he's got a 927 OPS, 6 home runs and 77 plate appearances versus lefties this season. And then you look at righties, 689 OPS, 3 home runs and 208 plate appearances. Not great, Bob.
No.
So, yeah, Alec Boehm, he goes through these spells where, he looks really good. He starts lofting the ball a little bit more, and we know that's been a career-long issue for him. His launch angle actually is up just a tad this year after being up just a tad last year. It's slowly inching up, but the exit velo's kind of not as great as we've seen from him in the past. So I'm just not terribly optimistic, even though, I mean, he has been a little bit better since he came back from a hamstring injury, I believe. These last several days, he's hit a little bit and certainly had the big game Saturday. But, I'm just not terribly optimistic we're going to see that this is the beginning of Alec Boehm's breakout.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take me a long time to completely give up on Boehm just because of the hitter I saw when he was at Wichita State and the hitter that I saw during the truncated season. He was really good in 2020, and now it's a very short sample size. I think he finished 2nd in Rookie of the Year that year, and deservedly so. He was really good. But then 2021, I will say this, he's made a massive improvement with the glove. That has been really nice to see, because the thing you were worrying about with Boehm was whether or not he was ever going to be able to play in the infield if he was just a pure designated hitter. Now he's a good first baseman and a passable third baseman, which is just to show you, it'll be funny if he ends up being a defense first player for his whole career or something like that. It's just funny how baseball works. But yeah, I mean, I believe in Bohm. I think that he has a chance to be, especially at that position. Drew and I talked about it. Third base is just an absolute disaster pile right now. And it's one of the reasons he took Jose Ramirez very early in our draft, is because after Ramirez, it's a pretty far drop. All due respect to Rafi Devers, who I ended up taking at the end, just because, you have to take a third baseman. And I still believe Rafi Devers will have a strong season. But third base being such a crapshoot basically right now, outside of a couple of players, maybe you do look and see if he has a strong second half, because there were moments too in 2022 where Bohm looked really good, had, of course, that big moment in the playoffs. I'm pretty sure that Bryce Harper told him to sweep the leg. That's what he whispered to him before that at bat. Can't prove that, but I do believe that's what was happening in that situation. But a very nice game for him. A few really nice offensive games and some bad pitching performances on Saturday. But one really good pitching performance came from Bailey Ober against the Baltimore Orioles, which is, a pretty tough lineup to do it against. 7 innings, 2 hits, no earned runs, no runs at all, 0 walks, and 8 strikeouts. Now, it's worth pointing out that Ober was kind of the lost man in the rotation for the Twins to begin the year. He was the guy that there was some talk about, whether or not he could be a trade piece for the team, because, that rotation was so full. Well, because of injuries and some not so great performances from some other guys, Ober's become a really important piece for them. And I think he's been kind of underrated in his consistency. This is now, I believe, the last time he allowed, I'm making sure by looking at the game log right here, the last time that he allowed more than 3 runs in a start came on Monday, May 22nd against the Giants. He's given up at no more than 3 runs in any start from that. And he's missed bats at a pretty acceptable rate too. This is now 4 of 5 starts where he's had at least 7 strikeouts. Is he a fantasy ace? Absolutely not. But Ober is a solid fantasy option who has earned the right. I mean, no matter what happens now, Bailey Ober is sticking in that Minnesota rotation. The division, we don't have to. It would be nice, honestly, if we didn't have the balanced schedule for Ober, because he would get to pitch against those AL Central teams a heck of a lot more. But he's done a solid job against good lineups, against mediocre lineups. I would be looking to target Ober for the second half of the 2023 campaign.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the only thing that might hold him back at this point, hasn't had a ton of his workload hasn't been big in his career. He's dealt with injuries at times.
Yep.
But he's I feel like there's a little bit of bias against him because he's like a huge guy who doesn't throw hard.
Yes.
You think, okay, he's a huge guy and he gets a decent number of strikeouts. He must be like a flamethrower, but he's not that at all. He kind of lives up in the zone, gets misses with the high fastball. But yeah, I mean, as long as he's towing the rubber every 5th day, I have a pretty high level of confidence that Bailey Ober will be a viable fantasy asset. Another guy with a good start yesterday, a little less confident in him, I'll be honest, which hurts me to say, I believe I've mentioned on this podcast before that I am a Cardinals fan. Have I done that before, Chris?
Once or twice.
Jack Flaherty, 6 shutout innings against the Yankees, 4 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts. He had a 5-start stretch where he had a 1.50 ERA and 33 strikeouts in 30 innings pitched. Looked like he was finally turning around, but then back-to-back starts where he gave up 6 runs and exactly 10 hits. And he also dealt with a hip issue, I believe, where he had to start pushed back. But now he has come back and made this really good start against the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees, since Aaron Judge went down, have not been a terribly daunting matchup. But still impressive stuff from Jack Flaherty. But are we going to see the consistency with him? I mean, he leads all of the National League in walks and hit by pitches this season. They've come in like he's had like multiple. I would have to go look at the game log, which I do not have pulled up in front of me right now. But I mean, he's had multiple starts where he's walked like 6+ guys. I mean, it's just his control has never been like pristine outside of the second half of 2019 when he looked like the best pitcher on the planet.
Yes.
So I don't know if he can totally be trusted. I think there's a pretty good chance the Cardinals are going to trade him later this month. It's weird that the Cardinals are going to be a seller. They're not used to being in that position, but
yeah,
Flaherty's on an expiring contract. Maybe he goes to a contender and certainly has the ability to kick into high gear. He's been healthy this year. The only thing holding me back personally from liking him in fantasy was the injury potential, but he's been healthy this year. He's just been super inconsistent. He's a guy I would like still to have on my bench, starting him in favorable matchups, which the Yankees at home, I think is considered a favorable matchup at this point.
sure.
So yeah, Jack Flaherty, not exactly sure what we're going to get from him, but certainly a positive outing on Saturday.
Well, I mean, look, Ryan, when he wants to throw hard, he'll throw hard. Haven't you heard that he's holding back? That's what we're waiting for in the second half, is to have
yeah.
I really like Jack Flaherty. Those comments were absolute nonsense and probably a sign that this season wasn't going to go super well for the St. Louis Cardinals, because there's been an awful lot of nonsense. And I think those came like right before all the Tyler O'Neill and all that stuff happened. I can't keep track of your shenanigans anymore, Ryan. That's just been you guys have been like the Mets this year. The Mets have just been
How dare
good.
you?
But this year, you guys have been more Mets in terms of storyline and stuff like that. Maybe that means that the Cardinals are about to get sold to a 100 billionaire who is going to bring puppies to press conferences and sign every free agent. I wish that for you. I wish that for everyone. On the not so good side, this one hurts me. Yuri Perez, goodness gracious, welcome to the major leagues, my friend. After being about as dominant as any pitching prospect I've ever seen in the major leagues, snap back to reality real quick. And now, look, we'll get into it. He gave up 7 runs in 2/3 of an inning, gave up back-to-back home runs to open the game against Ronald Acuna Jr., why people are pitching to Ronald Acuna Jr. in the first inning, I don't know. Just walk him, hope he doesn't steal a couple of bases, and hope for the best, because his line when he's leading off an inning right now is just absolutely insane. He is unbelievable. This is my way of not wanting to talk about how bad Yuri Perez was. He saw his ERA almost double from 1.3 to 2.47. This is just a reminder, Ryan, that as good as young pitchers can look, they are going to have these bitter moments. And for Yuri Perez on Saturday, it was as bitter as it can get. Having said that, not changing anything in my plan with Yuri Perez. You're putting him in the lineup every single time while he's out there, especially because we don't know how long he's going to be out there. There's been a lot of talks about the fact that the Marlins are going to manage his innings. All-Star break will certainly help. You can bring him down for a little bit. But if there are those moments, I think, where with off days where the Marlins can go with a 4-man rotation, I do think that Perez will be the guy who gets skipped more often than not, especially because if they're in the playoff contention, you want that guy to be ready. So that's the good with the bad with Perez, is that maybe you don't get as much help from him at the end of July, in the middle of August. But if they're in contention, Yuri Perez is making starts for the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned earlier about being around the All-Star break is an opportune time to put guys in the IL, give them extra rest. It's also an opportune time, especially since the Marlins have already, I guess the Marlins themselves haven't been open about curtailing Perez's innings, but it's been widely reported that they had been considering sending him down previously.
Yeah.
I mean, this rough start probably gives them the cover they need to go ahead and do that. That combined with being around the All-Star break, they could easily send him down to AAA Jacksonville, which he has never pitched at, by the way.
That's right.
He skipped the AAA level. But yeah, as you mentioned, he's been absolutely fantastic, like just insanely good for a 20-year-old righty. But, these starts are going to happen when especially the Braves in Atlanta, when it's hot out. That's just a really hard matchup. I believe the Braves set a National League record in June for home runs. So, yeah, that's going into a buzzsaw, no matter how good you're pitching, and he was not great that day. So
no.
that will happen,
Absolutely will,
for a young pitcher. But yeah, it's really just about how many starts he's ultimately going to make.
Right.
But as you mentioned, I mean, the Marlins are 13, 14 games over 500, something like that. I mean, if they're in contention, that he's going to pitch for them.
Yep.
They're going to do their best to, especially since Sandy Alcantara I mean, is this guy going to come around, Chris? I assume it's going to happen, but I know he's pitching.
I keep waiting.
Yeah, I know he's pitching today. So, and against those Braves in Atlanta, so that's not the setting.
Scoreless first.
Scoreless first. There we go. He's off to a good start.
Never mind. It's the middle of the first. We don't know if he started scoreless first.
Well, scoreless so far. He just has not towed the rubber yet. But
yes,
yeah, I'm not that rough start from Yuri Perez. I'm not super worried about it over the long term.
Sure.
This rough start, a little more worried about it. Luis Severino got roughed up against that same. He was pitching opposite Jack Flaherty in that part of the doubleheader yesterday. 4 innings, 7 earned runs, nine runs total, 9 hits, 3 walks, only 2 strikeouts against the Cardinals. Gave up 2 home runs. He's now given up 10 home runs in 40 innings so far since coming back from the IL. 6.30 ERA, 1.65 WHIP. That 6.30 ERA is actually better than his xERA of 6.91. So that would lead you to believe he's actually been a little fortunate to post that 6.30 ERA. I mean, it's been a lot of hard contact with Severino. The velocity has been fine. His slider has been oddly ineffective. That's usually his swing and miss pitch. It was great for him last year in his 18 or 19 starts, whatever he wound up making. Mm-hmm. But the whiff rate on that pitch this year has been cut in half from last year. Just has not been sharp for him. I did watch a good portion of yesterday's start. The fastball command is just not great for Severino right now. I mean, he had a really good start against the Rangers. Not an easy matchup. The start before this one. But then the 3 prior to that, were bad. So a lot of inconsistency. I mean, I would like to still keep Severino on my roster. But depending on your situation, a more shallow league, I could certainly see using that roster spot on someone else.
Well, I think the thing that Severino really has going for him is, to quote the owner of the Reds, who was asked what else about the fan park, what else are you going to do? Who the heck else are you going to pitch in the Yankees rotation right now? I mean, they are absolutely, even with Carlos Rodon hopefully coming back fairly soon, it's a lost rotation right now. They are they should be so thankful to have Garrett Cole right now, because everything else behind him right now is scary to me. All due respect to, not a ton of due respect to Domingo Germán, who did throw a perfect game and break my Felix streak, but yuck. It is really interesting to see those numbers that you gave me, though, just because the eye test has been pretty bad for me with Severino. Outside of one start that I watched that was okay. I'd be really curious to see how aggressive they are here, because if I'm the Yankees, I'd be super aggressive and take advantage of the fact that there's some good starting pitchers on this market. There are some guys who could really help this team out, but how aggressive will they be, knowing the fact that they are pretty much stuck in a wild card position, and knowing that, Alvin Rodon will certainly help. Hopefully he can be the guy that we saw over the last couple of years, but I'll be very curious to see what I would do. Long story short, again, Luis Severino, not a guy that I'm super excited for fantasy perspective going forward. It's interesting. One of the very first articles I ever wrote for Money was on Luis Severino, on whether or not he was going to be a bullpen option or not. And and as Uncle Ted brings up, Nestor Cortez will be coming back soon. But That's still the back of that rotation is still pretty gross, and I would imagine that they do address it somehow. I just curious how aggressive they're going to be. But yeah, a long time ago, writing about whether or not Luis Severino was going to be a starting pitcher for I think it was $50 is what I got paid for that. Now I get paid. Now I get paid 26 cents to do this podcast, and actually I end up paying them back in different ways. So we had some bad starts. We also had a really bad start that also became worse when we found out that he left with injury. Mackenzie Gore got absolutely lit up, giving up 7 runs in 2 2/3 innings in that start against the Phillies, and it was reported that he left with a blister. Now, blisters, as we know, can be pretty scary things for pitchers. It can be something that causes you to get back on that mound the next day, or it could be something that ends up being put on the injured list and you end up missing a few weeks for them. We just don't know how they're going to heal. Even with the blister, it's worth pointing out Gore has just been super hit and miss, and not in the good way for pitchers, unfortunately. Not even with the missed bats, there's a lot of runs that are being given up here. ERA up to 4.47. I'm a big fan of Mackenzie Gore in the long term, Ryan, but I'm kind of out on him for the rest of 2023. Just a guy that I'd much rather see have some success over these last few months. More taking a wait and see approach than a guy that I'm putting in my fantasy lineup again.
Yeah, I mean he relies so much on the fastball, like he can't find a consistent off speed and breaking ball to work for him, and he just can't throw strikes consistently enough. I'm with you. I still think there's fantasy ace potential in there somewhere if he can. All things can click. Nationals are kind of interesting over the long haul, not so much for 2023.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we'll see if it winds up being an IL stint, but I wouldn't be holding out a ton of hope for redraft value from Mackenzie Gore unless if you're in a league that has innings limits. I mean, he strikes out enough guys that's going to be valuable, but the consistency is probably not going to be there.
It's worth pointing out that those Nationals did take 2 of 3 from my Seattle Mariners and caused me to go apoplectic when they lost 4-1 when Patrick Corbin shut them out for 7 innings. But not a very good baseball team. There are too many of these, Ryan. There are way too many of these words we're not allowed to say on this podcast shows that are just not fun to watch whatsoever. But yeah, long term, I like Gore a lot. I mean, you look at the Savant page, it's very hard to be in the 76th, whiff percentage, and also in the 10th percentile in hard hit percentage, which just goes to show you that I think you and I have a better idea of where Mackenzie Gore is throwing pitches than Gore does right now. The stuff's electric. There's a reason why this guy was considered the best pitching prospect in baseball. And some people thought he was pretty close to being the best prospect in baseball altogether in 2020. Not so much right now, but there's still a lot. There have been more than enough flashes of brilliance to suggest that there is some long-term help, that he'll provide some long-term help over his coming seasons. Let's make some FAAB waiver target recommendations, Ryan. We've got 3 pitchers on the list, 1 hitter, but why don't you start with one that's not exactly a prospect, but I think a name that a lot of people have forgotten about because he was once a former prospect and now has had some success in the majors and looks like he might be on his way pretty soon.
Yeah, Tarek Skubal looks like he's going to make his season debut for the Tigers on Tuesday, and that comes against those, let's say it again, Double-A Midland Friendly. Yeah, so Tarek Skubal looked really good on his rehab assignment, coming back from a flexor tendon surgery, which I believe was last July, August, the operation he had. But 1.23 ERA, 20-3 strikeout to walk rate in 14 2/3 innings on his rehab assignment. He was really good in 2022, 3.52 ERA, 1.16 whip, 117 strikeouts and 117 2/3 innings. Upped his slider usage. That became his primary pitch ahead of the fastball, and that had great results with it. He didn't throw more than 4 innings on any of his rehab starts. So, how deep into games is going to be able to pitch? Probably not very deep initially, but, sets up for a 2-start week this coming week, and one of the starts is against the A's. So I think he's probably worth using anyway. Going to be interested to see if the Tigers maybe dangle him at the trade deadline. I kind of jokingly, I think it was just when he was doing a live batting practice session, and reporters back before the rate limits were exceeded were tweeting out that he was hitting like 98 miles per hour and live BP. And I jokingly tweeted that, he somewhat jokingly, tongue-in-cheek tweeted that he's going to be their primary trade chip over Eduardo Rodriguez.
Yeah.
Who Eduardo Rodriguez was before he got hurt, by the way, and was just pitching his butt off. So I'm not necessarily banking on that happening, but Tarek Skubal is certainly an interesting arm. He can miss bats. Up in the slider usage has worked out for him as well. Could be a trade candidate and go to a team that give him a better chance to pick up wins, but interested to see what he can do against those Double-A mid-days on Tuesday.
Yes. Yeah, the Rockhounds are a friendly matchup for him. I've liked Skubal for a while. Very inconsistent, to say the least, I think, in his professional time, but certainly has shown the upside. A nice little chance to this would be a start where you are using more the eye test than the results. And if those results are bad, that's bad. Like, all due respect to the Oakland A's, who are trying their little hearts out, it is not a lineup that he should have a whole lot of struggle with. But yeah, I'm really curious to see what he can do. I think I don't know if certainly the Tigers don't have to deal him or anything like that, but it's something that, like, you just look at that team and their offense especially is just so bad. You think that there's kind of like a need to kind of reset things, not necessarily rebuild, but kind of reset with what's going on. Be curious if we ever get to see Casey Mize back on the mound for them as well. Showed some flashes during his time with that team, but haven't heard a whole heck of a lot about Casey Mize over these last few weeks. And that's interesting because Ryan and I know the Tigers send out basically an invitation of injury list updates that is like a good page long of letting you know of everything that's going on, which we appreciate because it certainly gives us stuff to write about. And we can never say, hey, what's this going on? Except for it doesn't seem like Casey Mize is in those updates very often, but here's hoping everything works out for him. Jordan Westburg is a guy that I did not expect that we would be talking about as a FAAB edition this early. I did expect to see him make his major league debut, but comes up fairly early. And the big thing with Westburg is my concern was whether or not he was going to be able to play every day. He's playing every day against lefties, against righties. This was a guy who was second in the minor leagues in homers with 17 in his time with AAA Norfolk. Friendly confines, to be sure, but still a guy who has well above average power from the right side, has good approach at the plate, can hit for average. My one thing here is that stolen bases ain't happening with Jordan Westburg. He is a below average runner. Long term, I think he's going to be probably a third baseman, but he has some eligibility at some other places in some other leagues, which is nice to see. Nice little versatile guy to put on your bench and has performed pretty well so far. 278, 333, 350, 333, excuse me, even with an over 2 effort tonight. By the way, Sonny Gray has been absolutely outstanding, and the Orioles offense that we just lauded has not been so good over these last few games. Just one hit today from Ramon Urias so far. But I do think Westburg has a chance to be a strong fantasy option. Probably a guy that I want more in the long term, probably more of a guy I want in my middle infield spot or my corner infield spot for the rest of the year, more than a set it and forget it starter. But certainly a guy I'd be aggressive about picking up because there's just not a whole heck of a lot of prospects out there that'll be worth saving your FAAB for at this point.
Yeah, I was with you in that, I wasn't totally sure how many at-bats he was ultimately going to get, but looks like Jorge Mateo might get pushed aside. That's already kind of happened at this point. Yeah. I thought that Mateo's glove might keep him in the lineup, but his bat has been so bad since Remember in April when Jorge Mateo looked like a MVP candidate?
Yeah,
he is just absolutely crashed and burned.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jordan Westberg is interesting. Certainly has that power, and ideally he is a right-handed batter, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
That left field at Camden Yards, not exactly inviting these days, but
sure,
he has the kind of power he can still clear that wall and maybe hit some to the opposite field some as well. But Jorge Mateo getting pushed aside. Jordan Westberg has been in the lineup regularly. Another Oriole, we had someone mentioned in the chat earlier, when are you going to talk about Kyle Bradish? Because he was pitching opposite Bailey Ober and also looked fantastic. And hey, now we're going to talk about Kyle Bradish. We're saving him for the waiver wire section.
Yes.
Yeah, 6 innings, 1 run, 7 strikeouts Saturday against the Twins. It's been really good of late. 2.16 ERA, 0.88 WHIP, 23-5 strikeout to walk rate over 25 innings, covering his last 4 starts. Final first half start is tentatively projected to be against the Yankees. It is at Yankee Stadium, but as I mentioned earlier, the Yankees sans Aaron Judge, not a terribly daunting lineup right now. So
right.
I think Kyle Bradish has a pretty decent chance to keep the ball rolling. Doesn't miss a ton of bats, but he's just under a strikeout per inning. He's got a couple double-digit strikeout games under his belt as well, so he has shown the ability to pick those up in bunches at times. But yeah, certainly encouraging what we've seen from him, and obviously the Orioles are going to provide plenty of run support today, notwithstanding. So and yesterday, notwithstanding as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, in general, we should expect plenty of run support from the Orioles. Kyle Bradish definitely trending up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Baltimore's for real. It's time to take them seriously. This is now literally a full half of them being a team that's on pace to win 96 games. Do I think that Bradish offers some potential for disaster at times? Yeah. I mean, there's a chance for a clunker or two. That's true for all of their starters, by the way, which is why I think they should be as aggressive as anybody, by the way, to add a starter. Go Absolutely. Get Shane Bieber, Baltimore. Go get Shane Bieber and have some fun. And maybe I can root for you, since I'm not going to be able to root for the Mariners in the playoffs, it looks like at this point. So I'll take you behind the scenes here, folks. I told our buddy Alan, who puts these together, to use Mike Soroka as the cover art for this thing. And I'll be honest, after his 3rd inning, I was like, that wasn't a good idea. But every other inning was pretty darn good for Soroka. He ends up going 6 innings, gives up 3 runs, gets 7 strikeouts, 8 ground ball outs. I'm definitely recommending Soroka as a fantasy ad at this point, because I think he's got a chance to stick in that rotation. We are not far removed, Ryan, from Soroka looking like one of the very best young starters in baseball. And then, of course, he's dealt with about every injury possible since then, and, has not gotten much of a chance to get on the mound. And you take a look at his 6.89 ERA and you wonder what the heck I'm talking about. I think he's pitched much better than that. And in fact, if you take away that 3rd inning last night, which you can't do, I've legally checked, you cannot take away innings. That is not how this works. He was excellent. He was against a good Marlins lineup, not a great Marlins lineup, but a good Marlins lineup. I'm a fan of his stuff. I'm a fan of his command. I'm a fan of his poise on the mound. I also love the fact that as long as he doesn't get destroyed, he's going to get a win chance, because the Atlanta offense is going to give him a ton of chances for success. Yeah, I mean, Soroka was a legitimate Cy Young candidate for a little bit there, and now not exactly an old man by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe feels like an old man sometimes, considering the fact that he's had a couple of really ugly injuries, unfortunately, and picked up an injury, unfortunately, while he was rehabbing from one of those ugly injuries. But yeah, I'm adding him. I think that he has a chance to be, not a fantasy ace, but a very strong fantasy option. And the fact that he gets to play with that Atlanta lineup behind him, the wins matter, folks, and he has a chance to pick up a bunch of them as long as he's in the rotation.
By the way, I still can't see Mike Soroka's name without getting the My Sharona Mike Soroka song stuck in my head. I don't know. I assume you've seen that. It's just Is it a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
No, it's a terrible thing.
Not a good thing. Okay,
it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see Mike Soroka miss a few more bats.
Sure.
But that's, not generally going to be his game. The stuff hasn't been, I feel like it hasn't been quite all the way back from, poor guy. I mean, we talked about Royce Lewis earlier with injuries, and Mike Soroka said, "Hold my beer." He's dealt with plenty of issues himself. But yeah, I'm with you. Like especially I remember when he first came up, the level of command in a guy that age just is very rare. Is that going to totally come all the way back? Is this stuff all going to come all the way back? We don't know for sure. But as you mentioned, plenty of backing offensively from these Atlanta Braves. So at the very least, he's a guy I would love having on my bench, and just to see if we can reach that peak.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, maybe you're not starting Soroka against if he's pitching in Colorado or if he's facing some of the better lineups, but against pretty much everybody else, I think you can expect 6 innings of 3-run baseball, and that's fine. Like, it's not elite, but if you get that win chance and if you can get 5 or 6 strikeouts with it and know that you're not going to get a ton of walks and a ton of self-inflicted damage, I'm okay with that, especially at this point in the season. Right, there are not a lot of guys who can give you that right now. There just aren't. And so if you do have a chance to add, and, as Uncle Ted brings up, that's what matters the most about Soroka, is that he hasn't really had arm issues. The leg stuff matters. It really does, because you got to push off. You got to use that stuff to be able to get into the mid to high 90s. But the fact that he hasn't had arm issues suggests that he should be fine for the second half of the season, as long as there's not more leg stuff. And goodness gracious, if there's more leg stuff, I'm not doing this podcast anymore, because it hurts my heart to see guys who have worked as hard as he is to get back only to have setbacks. It's no fun. That's going back to Royce Lewis. That's the thing that hurts me the most about Royce Lewis, is he's worked his tail off to get back into this, and now has an injury that has absolutely nothing to do with that knee stuff, but it's another thing. It's another setback. I cannot imagine. Ryan, we're writers, so we can't really know truly how it feels to have.
I had carpal tunnel syndrome once, and that's tough for a writer. So I've basically been in the same in those shoes before.
Ryan, Mike Soroka Boyer, that is what we call you in the Slack chat. But yeah, that's going to do it for us. Thanks so much for joining. You can follow me on Twitter at Crawford_MILB, and you can file. You don't want to file Ryan, but you can follow Ryan at Ryan P. Boyer. Make sure that we are one of those 600 tweets that you get to see a day, because they're all bangers at all time. Make sure you hit like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. Really appreciate it. Hey, just got a question for you. Do I keep Yuri Perez after getting shelled? No, we're keeping Yuri Perez, buddy. We are keeping Yuri Perez. I know it's frustrating. I know it stunk, but Yuri Perez still has to be in your lineup. All due respect to Luke Giolito. But Ryan, it looks like you had something you wanted to say.
I was just going to say, if we're talking redraft, I would take Giolito over him the rest of the season.
Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If Giolito changes teams,
been pretty darn good, especially the last 6-ish weeks. And if he gets on a contender.
Well, that's the thing. If he's on a contender, this is all in. I'm Lucas Giolito. If he plays for a better team, for sure. I like Yuri Perez more. I like his ability to miss bats more. Luke Giolito is one of my favorite people. Getting to talk to his dad was one of my favorite things about covering the draft over that year. And I would try to get Giolito and maybe drop somebody else, because Yuri Perez, I think, is special. I think Yuri Perez is a very special pitcher who just happened to run into the buzzsaw of buzzsaws. Let's do that whole ending thing again. You can follow me on Twitter at Crawford_MILB. You can follow Ryan at Ryan P. Boyer. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. And remember, a new show every single day. And a very happy 4th to everybody. Go eat some